All right, good morning. As always, we're just going to start with a little bit of breathing. We're just going to tap into our body, into our internal experience, and just kind of contact our nervous system. So, with that being said, feel free to just lean back into your chair, find a supportive back. You can roll your shoulders back, aligning the neck with the spine. So, imagine if it was a string of beads on um, a string itself. Sorry. What you want to do is you want to lean that neck back so it aligns with the spine. Just soften the fingertips. Notice the jaw, placing the tongue at the roof of the mouth. I'm going to inhale through the nose. Begin to fill that space internally. Expanding the chest and the belly, and then softly exhaling. Another round of inhales. So inhaling again here. Slowly beginning to exhale. This process works like opening windows in the morning. You get to really filter out some of and cycle some of what is going on in your mind. So it's not about controlling it, it's just noticing what happens when we begin to slow down, noticing what happens when we begin to take some deep breaths. So on your next inhale, just slow down a little bit as you fill that interior space. Just take your time. Notice the expansion of the belly and the chest. Notice how it feels to focus on just filling your body with oxygen, simplifying this practice, uncomplicating anything that might be going on in your life, and bringing it all down to a breath and the quality of this breath. And then exhale when you're ready. I want you to ask yourself what it is that you want today. Like if I said to you, I can give you what you want today, what do you want? What is it that you would choose? Um, for a lot of us, we would have to like stop and think and be like, oh, I'm not really sure, right? Or we would be asking for something that like you'd ask something to stop. So instead of being proactive about what it is that we want, we would say, I want something to stop. We rarely ask for something positive and proactive. Um, we lack the vocabulary when it comes to the positive, to articulate what it is that we need or want in our life, specifically to raise vibrations. So, yesterday I was mentioning the idea that it's always important to have in mind that every situation we go into, every even every thought process, but it's important to leave the situation better than you when you were introduced to it, right? So when you enter a situation and you see it a certain way, you should always be able to leave it in a better condition when you leave, not a worse one. And in certain ways, that sounds easy and simple. And in other ways, it's really challenging, right? Especially if we're in spaces where we feel like the vibration can bring us down. So the thing is like this. For a lot of us, just like when we clean our own house we spend a lot of time cleaning, organizing, and trying to just create an ecosystem for ourselves. And then sometimes we can walk into somebody else's environment, and when it doesn't even have to be negative, it's just that it hits you the wrong way. We observe it in the wrong way in the sense that we're like, oh, this feels wrong, right? There's that negative, the negative approach to it rather than the positive. And what's interesting to notice is if you're in a space where you are dedicated to cleaning up a certain area of your life and you've refined that aspect, right? Then when you enter an area where that is not being either worked on or taken seriously, um, it can be frustrating because what will happen is you'll notice all the nuances and the lack, which is very overwhelming. Um, an example of this, which is interesting, was I worked as a lyricist for a while in the industry, in the entertainment industry. And my job was to polish words, make sure that sentences made sense when people sang them, and to add words that had more, um, I guess, that had more emotion or kind of fit. Um, so that was my job. And it was interesting because I would casually be listening to music, or my kids would casually be listening to music. And I got to a point where I couldn't listen to music with words anymore because I was so used to like critiquing sentences that I would always have a better solution in my head for how a sentence could have finished or how they could have started a song or or a chorus. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, no, I can't listen to music. And if you think about that, that's a little bit funny, right? Like I ended up losing out on something really great. Now, obviously, I listen to a lot of classical music, or I would listen to, I love lo-fi, like anything, like, um, from an energy perspective, just sound bowls. But I lost the enjoyment, right? The enjoyment of just being able to listen to a song because my brain was in a space of critique, of heavy critique. And it had to do with my job, right? So that was my job. But then the reality was that when I entered life, it took away from a specific enjoyment that was a simple enjoyment in life. And this is so important to pay attention in our life to see what are the things, where are the things that like, and again, we could be working on them, like, especially with self-care. This is where a lot of us are sensitive, is that you could be working really hard on something and have a very serious practice. And then you go out into the world and either you have family or friends, and you're like, why aren't people taking this seriously? Why are they so like we would even the word that came up to me was why are they being so irresponsible? What because in my brain, the concept of responsibility is what I attach to um taking life seriously. So when I notice that people aren't taking things as seriously as I am, it would be frustrating. But really, that's not that's not how it's supposed to be. So let me pedal back a little bit and we're going to get into the deeper concept of intuition. So as we polish, right? So as we polish our sense of intuition, what happens is we go into it's more of that lower vibration. We're not going into a higher vibration. So just like when I said about when we're formula like with baking the cake, for example, choosing the ingredients, When we choose a practice, we go into that critique space. But then when we go into our intuition, we're going into the lower part, that lower vibration. And that's really important to pay attention to because what's happening is we're going into a sensory experience, right? Relationships, right? Intuition is the key to relationships because it's the key to connect us with anything. So that first component to make just make note of is that we're coming into a lower vibration. A lower vibration makes us naturally more sensitive because to connect with our sensitivities, our sensory, the sensory part of our experience, we need to naturally be in that space where we are connected on a deeper level with ourselves. And when we are connected on a deeper level with ourselves, there is this space where there are no walls. We're not putting up walls. We're more transparent. We're more vulnerable. This is also where the creativity comes in as well. So, for example, um, I'll just use lyrics because that's where we started. Um, I first had to know a lot about music. Um, I was playing piano since I was 5. I played guitar. I played a flute. Um, and it was interesting for me to know first the whole like and I come from a family of trained singers. So I also understood where emotion needed to sit. And something that I think where one of my specialties came in was that um, it's very easy nowadays to listen to a very emotional song and something that can make you cry or trigger emotion. But the problem is that when you're creating a quality experience, there are certain spaces or notes that you're supposed to emphasize emotion, right? And it has to align, but it also, you have to leave the listener feeling content. The goal of every experience is not to break you down, not to break you down or break anybody around you down, which is also really important. When we think about being sensitive, it doesn't mean being unorganized. Sensitivity means being able to be in contact with your emotions and having and being in balance with that. And that's a misconception. A lot of times people say like, "Oh, I'm sensitive," and it has this negative connotation where this person will um again lean into negativity, but they'll get really, really emotional in the sense of they'll cry or they'll feel offended. But very rarely do we talk about like the positive side of this the sensory. So when we want to tap into the intuition, right? So like with the structure of music, right? I had to know the theory of music. I had to understand how music worked. Once I understood that, then I can drop into the softer, the creative, the gentle part of it and pull words from there, and pull meaning from there. I couldn't do it from the strategic aspect. The strategic aspect was like the framework. It was like the framework that I was working in. So when we're trying to tap into that intuition, understanding that that sensory experience has to be there first. And when we're in that space, there has to be a lot of trust, right? So that's the next aspect is that trust has to be available because when you're not in the space where you're critiquing and creating, right? We're not talking about we're in the planning phase, right? You have to trust that the space you're entering is trustworthy, right? So there are a few layers to it. There's that vulnerability, there's the intuition, and then there's having that sense of trust that's there. And the trust is trusting in yourself, trusting in your abilities, trusting that other people also have good intentions. So trusting that you have good intentions and other people have good intentions. Now the thing is, if you are in a space where you notice that your emotions are all over the place, especially when you first enter this part. of your experience. For a lot of us, when we're trained in school, we're taught school and life and home. For so many of us, is that space where we're in that intellectual part. We don't descend back into the lower vibration where we can be sensitive and kind of communicate from that intuitive aspect of life. So when we do discover it, and I know for myself, it was always lingering, but where I really discovered that space was I was about 22. And I remember not knowing what to do with myself. Like I didn't know what to do with myself. There was so much that came up, right? There was so much that came up for me, and I didn't know how to temper it. When I started doing yoga and when I started doing some breath work, that really, really helped. It really helped me stay in my lower vibration. It was a safe place to kind of introduce myself to that lower vibration. And what happened there was it helped me temper it, where I can go into the world and I can go into different experiences from that space. And when we're entering the world from that space, it's so much more playful, it's so much more enjoyable, and we have a much higher connection chance of connecting with people around us or even with the experiences around us. Um, and yes, it's hard because we're not playing games anymore. We're not trying to make people think things about us. We're not trying to control the environment around us. It's not about what other people think. It's about just being completely present and noticing what comes up for you intuitively. So what happens is we underestimate the intuition. In Hebrew, that's the Bini Yisera, like that real deep intuition. Um, and women were gifted with a large part of that. But when we go into our when we're entering from a space of calculating everything, calculating the calculated risks, um, judging, measuring, allowing our ego to take charge, it's very hard for us to enjoy life and also enjoy the people around us. Um, I had a situation yesterday where I I kind of was taken aback by something specific, and then when I took a moment, the first thing that came up for me was, oh, just like with the music and the critique, with the lyrics, I was like, oh, I the reason this is overwhelming me is because in my life, this is something I've been working on really hard. In that person's life, it wasn't important at all, which is okay. But I kind of entered that space and it just wasn't comfortable. Um, and it was interesting because I had a conversation with my son that observed the same experience, married son, and he had the same reaction. And I said to him, I was like, just our practice, our home, the way we approach life is just different. And that's where the sensitivity comes in for us. And then I reminded him about ego. And I was like, for me, the next thing that came up with, I was like fascinated because I was like, the situation involved, the people involved, there was no ego. And that was such a beautiful thing that they were able to move through something very specific and not worry about their ego. And for in my situation, I was like, no, like my ego was so strong. I was like, I would never be able to, like my ego was way too big to be able to move through life that way. And that in itself was a very, very powerful message that when we go into ego, into that calculation and risk, like we calculate, we're judging, that judgment, sometimes it will work against us. And it can stop you from enjoying simple pleasures in life. just so we look better for other people, whatever that is, or for our own ego, right? So when we drop into the intuition, when we drop into the lower vibration, there's that simplicity that's available to us, that flow, and we're also releasing the ego. So that's another thing. And we're able to just enjoy simple things. Just one second. Okay, sorry. Okay. So now, so how this all fits into the intuition, for a lot of us, we will enter a certain space in life and we're like, why do I keep failing in a certain area? And we get really frustrated. We're like, I did all the right things. I do all the right things. Why does why does this house of cards keep coming down? And a lot of times it is because we are not focusing on our intuition. We are not connecting with our intuition. We are making calculations, but we are not focusing on our intuition. We are not listening to our intuition because for a lot of us, we haven't spent time with our intuition. So a really great exercise, right? So this might sound really funny, but there's a game called Set, right? Sets where there's like three colors, three shapes, three numbers, and you have to kind of, I think some of you are familiar with it. It's like you have to find the set. And the beauty of it is sometimes you have to trust your intuition, as in every single time you look at the cards, it can be something completely different. You can very rarely will you kind of be repeating the same choices because they won't be there. And I feel like in life, there it's a similar thing that every single day we get up and it's a different formula today. It's not yesterday. Monday isn't Tuesday. And we have to be able to identify certain components in the day that might be familiar, but they're formulated a little bit differently. So, like sometimes playing the game of sets can help you with your intuition, by the way, to trust the intuition. But what we have to do, a really great, Paul Chek talks about this, where he talks it like, people will say, "Are you psychic? Like, can you see through people? Can you see what's going to happen?" And like people are so shocked. Um, they're like, how do you know? How do you know so much? And it's not about knowing, it's about taking the time to get to know your intuition because your intuition will be able to give you most of the pieces you need. So Paul Chek does this thing where he says he can sit in one room and he'll be sitting, let's say, on the couch and allow like his energy to wander past the walls, past into the next room, into another area. You could think of another person, whatever it is, and asking yourself, what is that person doing? Right? What is going on right now? It's not magic. What it is it's a deep sense of intuition. And when you're in that space of intuition, when we drop ego and judgment and we're in that lower space and we can trust, a lot of times we can figure out what is actually going on. And another technicality with that is when we are not in our intuition, when we're in that higher vibration, we are trying to force reality. We are either in the past or the present. I'm sorry, in the future. So we're in the past or in the future. When we're trying to really connect with our intuition, connect with somebody else, connect with our higher power, we have to be present. We have to be present. And even when we think about like davening, it's so much of what we daven for is like the future, the future, the future. But it's also, and so much of the words are about the future, but it's how present are we in the davening, right? Now, if you think about that, when you're having a conversation with somebody that you really care about, if you're completely present, you'll have the ability to connect. That person will feel like you're seeing them. There will be that receiving component. and it will be a give and take because we're in that lower space. So what you want to do is when you're if there's an area in your life where you're struggling to get past certain things, or you find there are walls of sorts, um, take some time to number one, sit in a meditation and notice if your thoughts are overpowering you, if you can come back into your intuition, you can say, okay, when these thoughts come up, if I go into the sensory, if I go into the softer side of myself, what is ego and what is reality? And then if I leave this place a better place than I entered it, right? You can ask yourself that. And then if you say, I trust myself, as in the trust is the key, um, more often than not, you will begin to discover pieces um, of the situation and you'll be fascinated because if you're completely present and you make whatever it is about the present, like the person standing in front of you, if it's a child or an adult, whatever it is, even an animal, whatever it is, you are able to be compassionate. It's not about them, it's about how we approach it, right? Um, it could be life-changing. And we can bring out the best in those people and we can bring the best out of ourselves. And it's a fascinating experience. And usually, more often than not, you will end up with an incredible experience. This brings up a thought. Last night, somebody called me about a photographer. She's like, I'm so sorry. This photographer, I was pressing him for names of somebody I can call for a referral. And she wanted to know, it was a photographer I used for my wedding. And she wanted to know if he did a good job. The thing was, she sounded extremely aggressive. And she's like, how was he? How did he do? How did he thing? And I was like, well, I thought he was incredible. I actually even tipped him. He was patient. He was, and then she starts, and I was like, I was very happy with the photos. And then she starts with like, do you think he'll want to take pictures of all the babies? Do you think he's going to want, do you think he's, and she starts all the questions. And I said, well, it depends on if the family can take direction or not, right? So like how we take direction, I said, if you treat him like a human being and you trust in his creativity, you know, I'm sure you'll get some really, really nice pictures. So I gave her some advice. I said, possibly plan with him before what's important to you. Let him know beforehand that there are certain things that will work for your benefit, like that you want, and he will focus on those things. The other thing I said to her was, I have worked with a lot of photographers in my life, really, really high performing ones and really low performing ones. And I said, one thing that I've noticed they do great with is when you let them get creative. Trust in the creativity, trust that he is going to capture things through that lens. But if you are going to start making him feel uncomfortable or aggressive or demanding, he's going to just shut off his creativity and give you the pictures you want of the things that you want without him being able to bring in that creative expression where those are the elements where these like incredible photos come from. So I just left her with that piece of advice and she's like, "Oh, you know what? You're actually right, because people go into situations and especially in that kind of situation, she's so nervous about getting the picture she wants that she doesn't even realize that she's stifling the creativity of the artist. And nothing good will come of that. So I don't know. That just came up. So I thought I'd share it with you. But thank you so much for joining us in this experience today. Um, yeah, yeah. I felt like that was a really important component to share. All right, give me a minute here.